Welcome back to Tuck-In Chuckles, where bedtime stories come with a smile and the night is always kinder than it seems. Tonight's story is Agatha versus the extremely persistent salesman, a quiet, funny, and warm tale for those who've ever met persistence at their door and invited it in for tea. So settle in and let the story steep softly around you. The evening had settled itself so perfectly that even the wind seemed shy of disturbing it. Inside a small cottage on the edge of the village, Agatha Primm sat with her knitting in her lap and the soft hum of the kettle whispering in the background. The fire glowed the color of old marmalade, and the cat, also named Marmalade, lay curled beside it, as though guarding the flames from drifting off before she did. Everything was calm. Everything was familiar. The clock ticked in a slow, round rhythm, like a heartbeat she could trust. This was her favorite hour, when the world outside grew dim and distant, and the cottage felt like a safe little pocket tucked into the dark. No callers, no errands, no sudden decisions. Just the warmth of the fire, the soft rub of wool against her fingers, and the pleasant certainty that nothing at all would happen tonight. It was, of course, precisely then that the doorbell rang. It was not a rude sound, but a polite chime, almost apologetic, as though the ringer were nervous about interrupting such peace. Agatha stopped mid-stitch. The fire popped. Marmalade opened one golden eye and closed it again with theatrical disappointment. She listened. Perhaps she had imagined it. Some evenings, when she was very tired, she could almost hear the rustle of book pages turning themselves, or the roses in the garden turning over in their sleep. Then the bell chimed again. Ding! Soft, persistent, hopeful. With a quiet sigh, Agatha set her knitting aside. "It's always the peaceful nights," she murmured. Her slippers whispered along the hallway. The air by the front door was cooler, touched by the damp breath of the lane. She slid back the latch and opened the door. Outside, the village lane was wrapped in a low silver fog. The hedges had lost their edges. The moon hid behind thin cloud, a blurred coin in a pocket of mist. On her doorstep stood a man in a gray suit. His hat was perfectly straight. His shoes shone like small, serious moons. He smiled, bright but careful. "Good evening, madam. My name is Percival Quibbleton, and I do hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are," said Agatha, very kindly. His smile widened as if she'd just confirmed an excellent hypothesis. "Wonderful. That means I've caught you at home." His voice was smooth but unhurried, the tone of a man who could be patient for hours or possibly days. He held a leather briefcase against his chest. Though it was firmly closed, Agatha had the odd feeling that something inside it glowed. Not enough to see, but enough to sense. "Well then," he said gently, "may I interest you in something to improve your evenings?" "My evenings are perfectly satisfactory," Agatha replied. "I've spent years getting them that way." "Of course," he said, "only the most contented of people deserve the tiniest improvements." From the hearth behind her, Marmalade offered a low, offended mirth. "The cat disagrees," Agatha noted. Mr. Quibbleton inclined his head to the unseen feline. "A discerning critic. Excellent. My products are feline approved, in essence, if not in practice." Despite herself, Agatha felt a thread of curiosity tug at her. "What exactly are you selling?" He brightened. "Tonight, madam, I am delighted to present a subscription service for perfectly folded napkins." Agatha blinked slowly. "Napkins?" "Indeed. Delivered weekly to your door, each one folded into a design of exquisite charm. Swans, lilies, pyramids, the occasional dragon for the adventurous. Imagine the delight of your dinner guests." "I don't have dinner guests," said Agatha. "Then you will be the envy of the quiet," he said smoothly. "You may admire them all by yourself." The fog curled around his ankles as if even it were interested in the answer. "I fold my napkins into squares," she said at last. "That has always been quite enough." He bowed slightly, as if she had revealed a noble ancestry. "A traditionalist. I respect that deeply." He straightened, still smiling. "Perhaps if you are absolutely certain you have no use for enhanced napkin experiences, I might call again tomorrow. Some people discover their needs quite unexpectedly." "You may call," said Agatha. "I may not answer." "An invigorating challenge," he said. "Thank you, madam." He tipped his hat, turned, and walked away into the fog. Agatha closed the door softly. The cottage seemed warmer by contrast. The kettle sighed in the kitchen. Marmalade padded over and twined around her ankles, as if checking she had not traded the house for a subscription. "That's quite enough excitement," she murmured, returning to her chair. She picked up her knitting, found her place, and yet the old, familiar quiet did not quite fit the way it had before. Somewhere at the back of her thoughts, a polite little bell kept chiming. The next evening arrived like a poured sheet of silver. A fine drizzle tapped at the windows, and the cottage glowed softly in the dimness, lamps lit, fire awake and purring. Agatha sat in her usual chair, knitting across her knees. The click of the needles and the hum of the kettle braided together into a slow, soothing rhythm. Marmalade warmed the same spot by the hearth, proving that some creatures see no reason to improve perfection. It was almost possible to believe she had dreamed the man in the mist, the glowing briefcase, and the notion of napkins that arrived in the post. Almost. Just as the kettle reached its familiar little sigh, the doorbell chimed. Ding! The sound slipped through the cottage like a remembered thought. Marmalade's ears flattened. You'd think he'd have found someone more promising, she muttered, rising. The hallway felt cooler again, edged with the outside air. When she opened the door, the fog had returned, pooling around the hedges, smoothing the world at the edges. Mr. Quibbleton stood exactly where he had stood the night before. Same suit, same hat, same unreasonably polished shoes. "Good evening again, madam," he said, as though this were an agreed-upon appointment. "I'm delighted to see you have not gone into hiding." "I considered drawing the curtains and pretending to be out," said Agatha, "but the cat disapproves of deception." "A cat with principles," he said. "How formidable!" This time he opened the briefcase without prompting. Inside, cushioned in velvet, sat a glass jar. A faint swirl moved within it, as though something invisible was stretching its limbs. Agatha leaned closer. "What have you trapped in there, then? Yesterday's weather?" "Today's," he corrected cheerfully. He lifted it with care. "This, madam, is a portable breeze, collected from the summit of Mount Miscellaneous at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon, bottled at peak freshness." "You're selling air," she said calmly. "Not just air," he replied. "A very specific air. One twist of the lid, and you may experience the sensation of standing at the top of the world." "Does it escape on its own?" she asked. "Never without invitation," he said solemnly. She regarded the jar. The mist behind him swirled as if listening. The hedges loomed like curious neighbors. There was something oddly soothing about the whole ridiculous performance. "I have more than enough drafts in this cottage," she said gently. "I spend all winter persuading them to leave." "Very sensible," he admitted, returning the jar to its nest. "One should never oversubscribe to breezes." He gestured vaguely toward the lane. "In that case, I shall refine my catalogue and appeal to your curiosity tomorrow instead." "Tomorrow again?" she said, feigning exasperation. "I am, alas, an optimist," he replied, tipping his hat. The fog made room for him as he stepped back, and then he was gone once more. When Agatha closed the door, the cottage held a faint scent, not quite mountain air, not quite her own, something cool and distant and kind. She made her tea. She took her chair. Marmalade did 3 tidy circles on her lap before settling, as if arranging thoughts he did not plan to share. Later, as the fire sank and shadows lengthened, she found herself glancing at the door for no reason at all. "No," she said softly to the empty room, "he won't be back tonight." But the thought that he might be tomorrow sat down comfortably and refused to move. The following nights slid into a pattern, neat as knitting. The hour grew late. The kettle hummed. The clock ticked its round, sleepy rhythm. The fire sighed in orange and gold. Marmalade rearranged himself like a small, furry cushion with opinions. And then, as reliably as the moon, the doorbell chimed. Ding! Never insistent, never impatient, just a small sound that asked, "May I interrupt?" Each time Mr. Percival Quibbleton stood on the step, surrounded by obliging mist, briefcase in hand. Each time he presented something new from his traveling collection of absolute nonsense. On one night, glow-in-the-dark spoons. He held one up proudly, and its bowl shimmered with a soft, ghostly sheen. "For midnight snackers, madam," he explained. "No more mysterious, unseen puddings." "Do they taste of anything unusual?" Agatha asked. "Mostly of confidence," he said. She folded her arms. "My puddings are perfectly self-assured already." "Then you clearly don't need these," he said, sounding almost delighted by the refusal. On another night, self-watering socks. "Guaranteed to keep your feet fresh," he declared. "And why," asked Agatha, "would anyone wish their ankles to be a microclimate?" "Some people like surprises," he said, "especially damp ones." Marmalade sneezed, which said more than Agatha could be bothered to. Another visit brought a left-handed teacup. It looked exactly like any other teacup. He placed it on her doorstep with reverence. "For your neglected left hand," he said, "it deserves its own cup. My left hand has behaved perfectly well for 70-odd years without special crockery," she said. "Then this is a reward for good conduct," he replied hopefully. She handed it back. "Tell it I said thank you." He took the cup and her refusal with equal grace. Night after night, the same pattern. A gentle knock. A strange offering, carefully presented. A refusal, sometimes amused, sometimes weary. A bow, a hat tip, a soft vanishing into the fog. The odd thing was how much comfort slipped in alongside the absurdity. After each visit, Agatha returned to her chair and found the silence not quite as flat as before. It had layers now, places where laughter could have gone, places where it still might. She would pick up her knitting and notice she had lost her place, as though her hands had been listening instead of counting. She would sip her tea and hear in her mind the careful way he said, "Madam," as though she were the most important appointment in his wandering calendar. Marmalade, ever perceptive, took to sitting by the front door a few minutes before the bell rang. One night, the moon hung low and round over the lane, turning the mist into pale silk. Agatha sat by the fire, not knitting, not reading, simply listening to the house breathe around her. "Do you suppose he's real?" she said at last. Marmalade gave her a look that translated quite clearly to, "At this hour, reality is negotiable." She smiled faintly. Quite right. it hardly matters. The bell chimed. Ding! It felt less like an interruption now, more like a familiar lullaby. When she opened the door, Mr. Quibbleton greeted her with a smile. "Madam, you are looking particularly unruffled this evening." "I was," she said. "Then you arrived with who knows what." "An encouraging sign of vitality," he murmured. He opened the briefcase with his usual quiet showmanship. Inside the briefcase sat a small porcelain plate painted with tiny steam clouds around the rim. Agatha frowned at it. What is that supposed to be doing? Mr. Quibbleton lifted it reverently. "Madam, this is a self-warming biscuit plate designed to keep biscuits pleasantly warm without ever melting the chocolate bits." Agatha blinked. "How warm?" "A gentle hug of warmth," he said proudly, "just enough to make them feel appreciated." She peered at it. "Do biscuits require appreciation?" "Deeply," he said. "Dry biscuits especially, they suffer quietly." "It's absurd," she said, though her voice softened. "Deliciously so," he agreed. "Yes, well," Agatha sighed, "my biscuits shall remain at room temperature. Thank you." "A bold choice," he said, bowing. The mist curled around the edges of the doorway like a cat around ankles. The night felt oddly awake. Something inside Agatha loosened. "You are absolutely ridiculous," she said, but there was no sting in it. "Reliably so," he agreed. She shook her head. "Very well. I shall not buy your elf-warming biscuit plate, but you may come back tomorrow and try again." He bowed. "Then I am, as always, at your service." When she closed the door that night, it was with a small care, as though the air on both sides of it mattered equally. The fire breathed. The clock ticked. The quiet came, not empty, but companionable, like a chair waiting for someone who might or might not sit down. The night that followed felt different from the beginning. The mist was thicker. The cottage lamps glowed in soft circles. The clock slowed to an almost thoughtful tick, as if counting something other than time. Agatha moved about her small kitchen with unhurried ease, setting the kettle on, laying out a plate of biscuits without really thinking why. Marmalade watched from his usual station by the hearth, eyes flicking from her to the front door and back again. When the bell rang, she was already halfway down the hall. Mr. Quibbleton stood where he always did, framed by fog and lamplight. Yet there was something a little softer at the edges of him tonight, as if the mist had started to consider him one of its own. "Good evening, madam," he said. "Thank you for continuing to open the door. It is an act of great bravery, given my track record." "I suppose I've built up a tolerance," she replied. "What are you selling now?" He smiled, but it was quieter than usual. He opened the briefcase. Inside, the velvet lining gleamed, entirely empty. Agatha folded her arms. "Is your new idea nothing at all?" "Oh, no," he said. "Nothing would be far too easy. This," he lifted his hand as if cradling something weightless, "is invisible jam." She narrowed her eyes. "Invisible?" "Completely. Calorie-free, impossible to spill, and capable of tasting precisely how you wish it to taste. A jar of pure potential, if you will." "You are offering me air in a jar again," she said. "Not air, possibility," he corrected gently. "Would you care for a complimentary sample?" Before she could protest, he mimed unscrewing a lid, moving slowly, reverently. He pantomimed spreading something across an invisible slice of toast, each stroke deliberate, as if the toast could feel it. He held the invisible slice out to her. The fog hushed. The lane seemed to lean closer. "What flavor is it meant to be?" she asked, playing along. "Whatever you miss most," he said softly. The words settled between them like dust in a sunbeam. For a moment, the sensible part of Agatha stepped aside. She tasted, in memory, a thick apricot jam from long ago, sun-warm, sticky, made in a busy kitchen with a laughing sister and too many sticky spoons. For just a heartbeat, she almost smelled it, almost felt its warmth on her tongue. Then the feeling slipped away, gentle as a sigh. "You are very dramatic," she said, but her voice had softened. He smiled. "And how much does your invisible jam cost?" she asked. "Only your attention," he replied. The fog stirred around them. Somewhere beyond the gate, an owl called once, a low, brief sound like a signature. Agatha hesitated. She felt the usual answer, "No, thank you," waiting on her tongue, tidy and ready. But behind it lay something else, something that had grown slowly over nights of soft nonsense and careful politeness. "You could come in for tea, you know," she said, "instead of standing out here frightening the hedges." He blinked. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked truly surprised. "I would be delighted," he said at last. The door opened wider. The mist stayed respectfully outside. The cottage welcomed him as if it had been practicing. The fire deepened its glow. The lamplight pooled more warmly on the worn rug. She moved about with the easy, careful motions of habit. 2 cups, 2 saucers, spoons, a plate of biscuits that had been waiting in the tin as though they knew this would happen eventually. Mr. Quibbleton sat on the spare armchair, perching at first on the edge, hat in his lap, as if he were not yet entirely convinced the furniture would allow it. For a time, the only sounds were small and comforting. The clink of spoons, the soft fizz of the fire settling, the hum of the kettle. "So," Agatha said at last, handing him a cup, "how long have you been doing this? wandering from door to door with a briefcase full of whatever that was. Jam, he replied, or the idea of it, and a while. A while, she repeated. Long enough that I cannot rightly remember when I started, he continued. Long enough that most doors close before I reach the interesting part. But you keep knocking? Yes, he smiled lightly. Persistence is what I know best. And how often does it work? Rarely, he said simply. People prefer predictable interruptions. Bills, parcels, neighbors they already understand. A stranger with a glowing briefcase is a harder sell. You don't say, Agatha murmured. He looked around the small sitting room, the books, the clock, the slightly faded cushions that had clearly been sat on by the same person for many evenings. This is a very peaceful house, he said. It does its best, she replied. Most people tell me what they lack, he continued quietly. More time, more money, more excitement. You don't tell me that. I have plenty of lacks, she said. I've just made peace with most of them. And what have you not made peace with? He asked. She thought about it. The question did not feel nosy, only gently curiosity. Empty rooms, long evenings, and people appearing and disappearing in the fog, she said. Everything else I can put in a drawer. Then I apologize for being part of the problem, he said. On the contrary, she replied, you've made the evenings shorter. He laughed, and the sound was different from his salesman's chuckle. It was softer, almost surprised, as if he had not expected to hear it himself. The cottage grew still in that particularly deep way it sometimes did, not silent, but filled with small, soft noises that all agreed not to disturb one another. The tick of the clock, the low breath of the fire, the very gentle purr of the cat. They talked for a while, not about invisible products or subscription services, but about smaller, safer things. Overboiled cabbage, the stubbornness of hedges, the way fog makes familiar streets feel like dreams. Then the conversation thinned of its own accord, like a river slowing at dusk. Mr. Quibbleton leaned back in the armchair, cup resting loosely in his hands, eyes half closed. "This is very good tea," he murmured. "It's perfectly ordinary," said Agatha. "Ordinary things," he replied drowsily, "are terribly scarce." His breathing deepened. Marmalade's purr settled into a steady vibration. The room felt padded, as though every hard edge had been wrapped in wool. Agatha let her own eyes drift shut just for a moment. The chair knew the shape of her back. The blanket over her knees was heavy and kind. The faint scent of tea and wood smoke and something almost like apricot lingered in the air. Sleep came quietly, like a courteous visitor who did not need to knock at all. Sunlight eventually found its way through the curtains, thin and pale and new. The fire had gone to ash. The kettle was cold. Agatha woke with a small start, the sort a person makes when they realize they have not moved in a very long time. The other armchair was empty. No salesman, no hat, no briefcase. Only a slight indentation in the cushion. And on the small table between the chairs, a napkin folded into the shape of a bird, a little crane, neat and careful. She lifted it. The paper was still faintly warm. Beside it lay a tiny parcel wrapped in brown paper and string, with her name written on it in looping, hopeful handwriting. She unwrapped it. Inside was a small glass jar. At first, it seemed empty. Then, as she turned it toward the light, a faint shimmer moved within, like the memory of color pretending to be nothing at all. A narrow label was tied around the neck with twine, In small, steady letters it read, "For when the evening feels too quiet." She smiled. Marmalade hopped onto the mantelpiece, sniffed the jar, and then settled down beside it. The day moved on. She washed the cups and smoothed the blankets. No mist this morning, only clear light and ordinary hedges. The doorbell stayed silent. That evening, when the light faded and the lamplight gathered itself again, Agatha sat in her chair and poured her tea. Out of habit, she glanced at the door. "Well, Mr. Quibbleton," she said softly, "wherever you've wandered off to, I hope someone, somewhere, is buying your nonsense." Marmalade blinked very slowly, which surely meant he hoped so too. A little later, as she looked toward the mantel, she thought, just for a moment, that the jar glowed faintly from within. Perhaps it was only the firelight catching the glass. Perhaps it was a memory stretching. She closed her eyes. The clock ticked. The kettle sighed. The cat purred. The house, the lane, and the quiet all settled around her like a well-folded blanket. And when sleep came for her that night, it arrived exactly the way she liked it best. Softly, politely, like a gentle knock, she did not need to answer in order to let it in. And that's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for joining me tonight on Tuck-In Chuckles. Until next time, good night and sweet dreams.